Hello there, IELTS students. Welcome to IELTS Podcast. You no longer have to worry, fret or panic about IELTS because we are here to guide you through this test jungle. Enjoy these IELTS tutorials, and if you need more help or want to access the famous online course, you can visit us at IELTSPodcast.com.
Describe a positive change in your life. You should say what the change was, when it happened, how it happened, and explain why it was a positive change. Sample answer. Well, they say that it's never too late to change your ways, and that's something I learned a while back when I joined a club. I know it doesn't sound all that exciting, but it was a book club. We meet up around once a month in a member's house. There are 10 of us all together, and we take turns to host the meeting, and we sit around discussing that month's book. I joined the club about a year ago, and it's really turned my life around. I mean, I work for a finance company, and my job is very high-powered, extremely stressful. You're constantly under pressure, working around the clock, and what I found worst, I was taking my job home with me, never switching off. I have friends and colleagues who do sports or work out every day at the gym as a way to deal with stress, but I've never been into that sort of thing. And when a neighbour of mine told me about this club, I jumped at the chance and went along to the next meeting with her. What happened was that I bumped into this neighbour in the elevator, and I noticed she was carrying a copy of the classic Charles Dickens novel, Great Expectations, a book I'd been more or less forced to read in my last year in high school. I asked her if she was enjoying the book, as a kind of a joke really, but when she told me how the novel was all about learning that wealth and social class are so less important than true values like love and loyalty, it struck me that maybe there was more to reading and literature than meets the eye, and pretty soon I was hooked. For me, it's been like a breath of fresh air. I've made new friendships and discovered a love of literature for the first time in my life. Reading these books, whether they're classic or modern, gets you out of yourself into another world, and yet at the same time helps give you new perspectives on life in general, especially the issues we're facing today. The other week, for example, we talked about the Tom Wolfe novel, The Bonfire of the Vanities. It's about ambition and greed in 1980s New York, and we all agreed how true the book's themes ring today. At the same time, I found that through reading and talking openly with friends about what we're reading has helped me so much in my daily life. It's done me a world of good. You see, I'm not so much tied up in my own little world of finance 24/7. I have a great social life, and my work is on the up and up as well. It's made me a much happier person. I think, yes, I'd say that it's really been a change for the better. Describe a tradition in your country. You should say what it is, who takes part in it, what activities there are, and explain how you feel about it. Sample answer. I'm going to talk about Guy Fawkes Night, an event which is held in parts of the UK, mainly in England, on November the 5th each year. It's also known as Bonfire Night because it involves making and lighting a large bonfire and a firework display. It's an annual tradition which dates back to the early 17th century, to the year 1605 in fact, when a group of conspirators, including a man called Guy Fawkes, attempted to blow up the Houses of Parliament in London on the day the king of the time, James I, was going to be there along with all the members of the Houses of Commons and Lords to mark the official opening of the parliamentary sessions for that year, a tradition that is still observed to this day. The plot failed, and Guy Fawkes, among others, was arrested and later executed. So originally it was a kind of festival to celebrate the fact that the king had survived. And historians also point out that it played an important role for many years in promoting anti-Catholic sentiments among people. Fawkes and his friends were Catholics who were demanding their rights to the Protestant authorities, including the king. Well, I guess these days those sentiments are not so strong, and when we were kids we didn't give that side of things too much thought either, to be honest. What we did in the days leading up to the 5th was to collect wood to make the bonfire, along with old rags or whatever, to make an effigy, a guy we called it, to put on top of the bonfire, as well as ask for money to buy fireworks. It was a very popular event, especially in working class areas such as where I lived. Of course, some families had a little private firework display in their gardens with adults in charge of everything. But for many of us, it was a question of gathering in some public space and just having fun, though some adults did come along to join in the festivities. I seem to remember that there was always a lot of local rivalry between neighbouring districts to see who had made the biggest bonfire or let off most fireworks. I think in recent years the tradition has died out a bit. For one thing, Guy Fawkes himself means less and less to kids today, though I've read that some people just make an effigy of an unpopular figure, a politician for example, and burn that. Also, of course, the festival falls on a date so close to the annual tradition of Halloween, which has its own very rich cultural heritage, and of course gives kids and adults the chance to dress up in all kinds of weird costumes. Yeah, it appeals to all ages, young and old. Whereas I began to lose interest in bonfire night by my early teens. Perhaps all that's left of Guy Fawkes these days is the Guy Fawkes face mask, made famous in the film V for Vendetta, which we see people wearing in protests all over the world. You know, it's nice to think that Guy Fawkes lives on in our hearts as a symbol of protest and resistance against greed and corruption. Describe a city that you think is interesting. You should say where it is, what it is famous for, how you knew this city, and explain why you think it is interesting. Sample answer. I'd like to describe the city where I studied, the city of Brighton, which is situated on the south coast of England, about 70 kilometres south of London. An hourly train service to London adds to its attraction. It was originally a small fishing village, but grew into a thriving town around the beginning of the 19th century, mainly because the Prince Regent, the future King George IV, used to spend time in Brighton enjoying the fresh air and the sea breezes, away from the hustle and bustle of London. It was a time when a seaside health holiday started to become a craze with the most affluent sectors of society, and that notion spread to working people as time went on. Brighton became a very popular holiday resort, a place to go for cheap entertainment and fun. The Prince Regent had the Royal Pavilion built for him, a residential palace where he could enjoy music, dancing, and holding lavish banquets. The architectural style associated with this period, known as the Regency style, can be seen in many of the large houses and squares all along the seafront. That style, along with the later styles, such as the prize-winning 1960s University of Sussex design and the nearby Brighton football stadium, built quite recently, make Brighton a fascinating mix of old and new, a city steeped in history as well as being ultra-modern. I first knew the city years ago as a student at the university, as I said, which is a short train or bus ride from the city centre. And I could say that in those days, I knew the city like the back of my hand. I was very happy there and always thought of it as a home from home. As students, we tended to avoid the tourist hotspots, But if you're planning to go there, visit the area called the Lanes in the centre of town. It's really the old fishing village, now full of coffee shops, bars and boutiques and so on, all situated in a few narrow 18th century streets, devoid, of course, of traffic. Just soak up the atmosphere, even though if you're shopping, it's a bit pricey for most people's pockets. And if you're a book lover, well, seek out the second-hand bookshops in that part of town. You could spend hours browsing around them. Add to that some first-class restaurants and clubs, as well as the beach and surrounding countryside. Yeah, there's something for everybody. I think the one thing I like about Brighton is that it's such an easygoing place to live. Nobody seems to judge anyone else for the way they dress or where they come from. Of course, I studied there and later worked there for a couple of years, and I was much younger than now. Maybe these days I'd find it all a bit overwhelming, but that feeling of being able to blend in with young and old, students and local people, is something very few places offer.
Thanks for listening to IELTSPodcast.com.